Okay, so we just think we're sitting here together for this little bit of time to listen, to think about, analyze, contemplate, internalize Buddha's views about reality, about happiness and suffering, etc., etc. And we're listening to it as advice. We don't have to take it. Buddha's not the boss, we are, but it's advice. It is advice. So we'll hear it like that. And what's it advice for? Well, to help us develop our amazing potential so we can help others. That's it, bottom line. We'll sing our little prayer that expresses that. Sangye Chadang Choke Chognam La Jancho Baru Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chunyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Shok Sangye Chadang Choke Chognam La Jancho Baru Dagni Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chunyen Gipe Sonam Ki Drola Penche Sangye Drupa Shok. And by the merit of, so we take refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and by the merit of listening to these teachings, may we become Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. That's it. Well, there's one about motivation. We hear all the lamas say it, but I think somehow it takes a while to really hear it, what it means actually. And so the key thing is, and this is related to karma, that actually, as we know, Buddha says, Buddha's deal is that every millisecond of what we think and then do and say is a karma, is an action. And every action leaves an imprint in the mind. It like trains the mind. It programs the mind. I think Buddha would have liked that, programs the mind. Now we get that. We get that when it comes to music and math and cooking. You know that everything, every single thing you do on that piano produces the piano player you become. It's not just random. You can't just play any note you like. It's very rigorous and very logical. But we don't have that same feeling about producing ourself. And that's the simplest way to put what Buddha's on about. His expertise is how to produce a really marvelous person. We think all the external circumstances produce us, don't we? We're victims of these circumstances, So the point is, though, the Buddha's saying, the key action we do, the main one is the mental one, which is the thought, intention, I will, volition. But there's two things there. There's two things. There's the intention to do something, and then along with it, so tightly linked to it out of our habit that we think they're the same thing. Then there's the motivation that impels you to do it. So we can see very clearly. So then if it's a negative action, it's fairly straightforward. The intention to, say a rude word to someone, to shout at somebody, to be mean, to say an angry word. That's the intention. And it's all very quick. It happens so spontaneously. And then the motivation, normally we know that. If you hear a person shouting at somebody, you can kind of deduce that the motivation behind it, the intention, the motivation behind it, what impels it, it's obviously anger. It's pretty, generally speaking, you can say that. Look at yourself. You're annoyed with your partner, and you say something. And what's it driven by? It's driven by anger, annoyance, upset. So that's called a negative action. And so, but the key point is this. The main factor in that determines whether it is a negative or positive action isn't the intention, isn't even the doing of the action of saying those negative words. Because perfectly well, in another situation, you could be a mother and the child has not listened to your advice. 4 times you said do something and they haven't done it. So you've got to now use tough means. You've got to use tough love. So you raise your voice and you say, I've told you 4 times, I want you to go to your room. Now, the child will think mummy's angry. It will sound like anger. But we know if you're a good mother, there's no way it was anger, because anger is the wish to harm. Anger is not getting what I want. Anger is self-centered, mild versions or intense versions. But you know very well, in other words, it is possible to do an action that looks negative, but is motivated by a pure motivation. And that's the simplest example possible. But of course, most of the time we do shout, it's because of anger. Most of the time we do something mean, it is because of negativity. But it's possible, even a negative action, even the extreme example of killing. I mean, it's not uncommon among all of us. We say polite words like put our little pussycat to sleep. Well, we're killing our pussycat. We put our grandma to sleep. We don't call it that. We use a fancy Greek word. We call it euthanasia. As soon as we have fancy words, we use Greek. It's so weird. but it's called, it's called taking someone's life. So the intention is, I will kill my grandmother. You don't say it so bluntly. I will kill my pussycat. That's the words, but we don't like to say that. But what's the motivation? Straight away, we know it's not out of anger. It's out of compassion, actually. And that's true. The motivation is compassion. So the point about that action is, what determines whether an action we do is labeled negative or positive is not but even doing the action, is not even the intention, but it's the motivation. And that's why when we understand that, that is where the liberation is. That's where we can learn to change our motivations, because that's the key factor. So in that case, like a complete action of killing, one is, a complete action is one that drops a seed into your bank vault. That is the seed that will be the one that is triggered at the time you die, and that determines your next life. So that's called a complete action. And this is kind of speaking fairly simply. It's much more nuanced than this. There's more detail to it. But essentially, there are 4 things in place. So if you think of a simple action like generosity, exactly the same example. Generosity is in its nature a good action. Killing in its nature is not a good action. You can see in its nature, you can label one as positive and one as negative. So generosity is a good quality. It's a good action, it's a virtuous action in its generally speaking. Killing, generally speaking, is called a negative action. So, we're trying to do positive actions and not do negative ones. But exactly the same way that in a negative action called killing can be motivated by compassion. But by the way, as Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. And I'll explain that in a minute. You need to have wisdom. But with the generosity is a simple example. Generosity is in general a good action. But what if I've got a rich friend and I want them to give me things? I want them to like me. I'm completely wanting their money. So what do? I act like I really like them. I act like I'm really kind, and they can't find their wallet and they need $20 for the taxi. Oh, I'll give you $20. And they think, oh, Robina's so kind. But what's my motivation? It stinks. It's completely attachment. It's not valid. So you could argue that's not a very good, that means I don't create very much positive karma. It is an action. You get your $20, you're happy. With the killing, the mouse your pussycat does die. You do the action and the cat dies. But what we tend to think is, oh, but it's okay because I meant well. Well, we've got to analyze, who is it okay for? In the negative actions, it's very interesting. You've got to analyze, who is it okay for? It's okay for you. You could even argue you don't create much negative karma at all, because the motivation is the key factor that gives the character to the actions we do, that determines whether it's negative or positive, which in turn determines the seed we pop into our bank vaults, which determines the future result. It's quite a technical point. And when we know this, we can learn to have control over it. We can start to change our behavior. And we'll talk about that now. But one of the generosity, so the pussycat one, it's fine for you. And that's what we felt we meant well. But we don't bother to ask about the pussycat, do we? I mean, we know that Lord Buddha says that the pussycat's mind will continue. Minds are beginningless and endless. That's what Buddha says. We can't prove it yet. We're not clairvoyant. But we're taking it as our hypothesis, aren't we? If we're Buddhists or trying to be Buddhists. So that's fine for us. There's 2 people involved. There's the cat and there's you. So you are okay because you meant well. But then, as Rinpoche says, meaning well is not enough. And that's really clear, I always use the example of, I've got a terrible headache and you've got a couple of pills, but you can't remember which was aspirin and which was cyanide. Well, I would thank you for keeping your pill in your pocket and leave me with my headache. And we all know very well that if there were a possibility of a dire result of such an action, you would not play Russian roulette with my life. That's a really simple example, but we don't think that with the pussycat, because we're so caught up with the suffering of the cat right at this minute, and we want to stop the suffering. But we don't give thought to what will happen to the pussycat's mind when it leaves this little pussycat body. And when we understand the death process, we'll know, we've done that. We did the course, didn't we? But when you understand what happens at death, it's very technical, that in general, most people's death, certainly animals, not to mention humans, are very fearful, because a certain thing occurs at the time you stop breathing. Before you stop breathing, the 12 links, Rinpoche talks about it in his book. The 12 links, there's a particular way it functions, the 12 links of dependent arising, a particular way they function at the time of death. So what kicks in about the time before you stop breathing, what kicks in is a very powerful level of intense attachment. It's the 9th link called grasping. It's intense attachment. And that's, as Rinpoche says, in general, attachment is the reason death is so fearful for most people. Because what are you attached to? You're attached to not dying. You're attached to this body, this life. So it's really, most people's death is fearful because of this. And it's a natural thing. Even if you're prepared, even if you're a high yogi, still there's some trepidation there, although they're prepared. So the mouse, the poor little pussycat, has got no volition, has got no understanding, has got no way to practice anything. And their death will be just as fearful because we've died billions of lifetimes for the Buddha. So it's deeply instinctively ingrained in us because of this intense grasping at permanent me. Everyone's got it, especially the pussycats. Then it's going to be intense fear for them. And the point is this, that grasping, when it's triggered, that becomes the trigger that triggers the karmic seed in one of your bank vaults that will determine your next life. Even if it's a virtuous karma, you know, you've got other virtuous conditions playing their role there, but that grasping is pretty intense. So if it's a poor little pussycat, you know, it's not, you can't say, because we're not clairvoyant, but it's more than likely that little pussycat went from the frying pan into the fire. It already's got a suffering animal rebirth with no ability to change its mind, no understanding of its fear. And animals have a lot more fear than most humans, even though it's a surprise to us. I mean, it's a shock, in fact. Lama Zopa said one time years ago, someone told me, this is shocking to us, that if we could just for a moment have a direct experience of the mind of our little pussycat or our little doggy, the mental suffering of, meaning the fear, because we've all got ego grasping and they've got it 1 billion times stronger than we have, the mental suffering of that animal would be so unbearable, we would never want to waste another precious second of this precious human life. Now, that's very shocking to hear. None of us would ever think that our pussycat is suffering, only if they get hurt. We never, because we can't see their mind, isn't it? So this is very, very sobering, you know. And we have to deduce that's coming from the experience of a yogi who sees the minds of others, which is possible. So the normal little cat's life, and you know, it necessarily will be, the death will be very scary. So then it's fine for yourself, but we don't ever think what's best for the cat. And the fact is, why did we kill the cat? Think of the reason. In our mind, the reason was for the cat's sake. But if the cat ends up getting a suffering rebirth, how have you helped the cat? You made yourself feel better. I'm sorry to be rude. But this is the thing about, this is why. So motivation is fine, but it can also turn a positive action into a negative result for you because of your motivation. And a negative karma for you can be not so bad because of your motivation. But that's another discussion about the poor old pussycat, you know. So if you get my $20, you're happy, you're fine. Who cares about my motivation? But my karma, not so cool, you know. So let's look at then what it means, especially when we listen to the Mahayana teachings, you know. This is where it really is taught, really expressed in the Mahayana teachings. Because in the first level of teachings, which is the Hinayana part of the path, which is the first stages of the Lam Rim, which is junior school and high school, as I like to call it, which is where we're basically playing safe. We're avoiding harming sentient beings. We're watching our body and speech like a hawk. We're controlling our body, controlling our speech, controlling our mind. And the main energy behind that, the main motivation behind that is to protect oneself from creating negative karma. It's protecting yourself. Now, when we get to the Mahayana, this is where, and Lama Zopa never stops talking about it, this is where now we have to, the motivation is the key factor. The motivation is the key factor. So this is where, you know, you could say on the Mahayana path, actions that would be normally deluded, negative, even mildly, can be transformed into a positive action merely by having a pure motivation. And it's really quite simple. It's a very brilliant way to learn to live our lives, but it seems kind of like a bit cheap, like we're sort of like cheating or something. No, it's a skillful means. So in other words, on the first level of practice, you know, Buddha is exhorting us to really control our body and speech. And he's got this list of about 10 things that he says we should try and avoid. And the basis of this is not because they harm others, and they do, in fact. That's how he defines them, as negative. The heaviest negative are those that harm others. But his motivation for us to refrain from killing and stealing and lying and jumping on the wrong partner and taking things that don't belong to us, etc., is for our own sake, given that everything we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind. So that's the main emphasis in the first stages of practice. So we're protecting ourselves. So there's not much discussion about motivation there. Of course, if we're on the Mahayana path, we still put the motivation in. But the energy of the character of those actions is to protect us from being negative. So we're playing safe, we're being cautious. So in that level of practice, Buddha doesn't tell, he says, don't kill, don't steal. There are various actions of the body, for example. 3, don't steal, don't jump on the wrong partner, and don't kill. But he doesn't say don't eat 5 pieces of cake. But once you understand the energy behind those suggestions, it's his medicine, it's not his instructions, he can't force us. It's his suggestions, he's a good doctor for our own mental health. We then see that we can deduce from that, well, if I'm trying to control my body and speech, and at least I don't lie, at least don't badmouth behind backs, at least don't abuse your partner, and at least don't just go blur about nothing. But and that's pretty good, that covers most speech. But when it comes to our actions, we can see there's 1,000 actions we do that are motivated by attachment, like eating food, sleeping, having sex, having a beer. I mean, we think, well, that's normal human behavior. What are you talking about? It's negative. Well, if we understand Buddhist teachings properly, technically, clinically, any action motivated by attachment or aversion and all the other delusions, that's what defines it as negative. That's what defines it as negative. Now, you could argue if you're completely full, you've had your dinner, and then your friend rings you up and says, I need to have a chat to you, come out for a meal. And so you kindly agree and you go and eat your meal. And then that would be virtue because you're not hungry, you're not attached. So you could argue that's the only time you're going to eat food that's not driven by attachment, because that's why we eat. If you're not hungry, you don't eat. So of course it's an attachment action, but it's not the heaviest one because it's just, you're just increasing your own attachment. If you haven't got a partner, and so you don't break a commitment. Let's say you've got a vow, when you take vows and you've got a vow not to cheat on your partner. But if you haven't got a partner, there's no vow that says you can't have 5 boys on one day. There's no vow that says that. So you're not actually doing, and both of you enjoy each other's company and you also love each other and you're kept generous and kind. That's wonderful. But it doesn't mean you're not increasing your attachment. Of course you are. I mean, if you don't like him, you're not going to sleep with him 5 times unless you're a bodhisattva. So of course the actions we all do, and this is where it gets a bit depressing because it just sounds like normal life. But we've all got to eat. We've all got to have sex. We've all got to do, and our view of it in our normal world is not the same as Buddha's. So this is why we've got to have a much more nuanced, more subtle, more deep understanding of what attachment is, because that's the main motivation. That is the main cause, as far as Buddha is concerned, that is the main cause of suffering in the universe. Attachment. And on the basis of that, there's anger. And on the basis of that, there's pride and all the other dramas. So attachment is the bottom line. Everything we do, eat, sleep, go to the toilet, scratch yourself, turn this way, go that way, go up, stand out, go out, whatever, is driven by attachment. I want. It sounds very shocking, but that's our usual motivation. That's what motivates most actions. So that means, don't be depressed about it. We just have to become very clinical. We have to become very good at being our own therapist. So this is where, in the first level of practice, you just try to play safe. So and that's why when you take refuge, we're going to discuss this in the weekend. No, wrong center. Yeah, well, I'm going to anyway, but for Ling, sorry, San Francisco. I get confused because I have the same room everywhere, so I can't tell where I say it. It could be India at 6:30 in the morning. It could be Australia at midnight, but I forget. It's Ling. The weekend we're going to do refuge. No, not Ling. Gyawa Gyatso, sorry, ocean and compassion. But so when you take refuge, and now I distracted myself. Yeah, when you take refuge, what was I going to say? I forget, never mind. So the point is, mostly what we do, being a samsaric person in this body, which is the body of 5 senses. So what karmically has created this body is attachment. What else is it? It's attachment. We've created, penises and vaginas and mouths and ears and noses and eyes, bodies and tactile sense and nervous systems. That's our own karmic evolution. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, karma is like self-creation, So, hang on. So mostly what we do, and this is where we just think it's kind of being benign, and it is benign, mostly with attachment, we're harming ourselves. Because everything we think and do is driven by attachment. And that's why we get distressed. That's why we get bored. That's why we get angry. That's why we get depressed, but we don't pay attention. So at least at the beginning, Buddha's exhorting us to merely refrain from the heaviest negative actions. But then we can begin to deduce, well, maybe I should start controlling my eating, Maybe I should start not eating, just shoving the cake in because I feel like it. You're not hurting cake. Cake doesn't mind. It's not a human being. But we realize why Buddha's exhorting us. This is a crucial point that I think in our culture we really miss this part. We think, oh, I shouldn't kill. Buddha says don't kill. So does Jesus. So does your grandmother. Well, why not, Robina? Oh, just because it's a good thing to do, you shouldn't kill because it hurts people. That is true. But that's not the reason in the beginning. The reason for Buddha is to protect yourself from creating. You protect yourself from doing those actions because they will bring suffering to you. And that's what we really skip over. We just say, oh, that sounds selfish. I shouldn't do that, you know. And if we don't get this first, we can't have proper compassion. We've got to have compassion for ourselves. And that's what drives our wish to abide by the laws of karma. You're using Buddha's guidelines, you know. It's self-respect. In the same way that when your doctor says don't eat sugar, you're not doing it out of compassion. You're doing it out of common sense because you don't want to get sick. No one criticizes you for that. Well, that's the karma, except it's mental, that's all. But the point about the motivation, there's two things. First, there's the cake. That's the first of the four. It was a complete action. A complete action is one that drops a seed, a main seed in your main bank vault, which determines the type of rebirth. The four things in place. One is the object, it's a cake. Two is your mind involved in it. And there's intention, I will eat cake. That's just bare bones. There's no character to intention. It's bare bones. It's not good or bad. It's not negative or positive. In the mental factors, it's in the third category, which is called neutral, meaning neither negative nor positive. It's just bare bones volition. I will. But because motivation is so linked to it, we assume they're the same. We conflate them, but they're separate parts of our mind. This is crucial to understand. So the motivation there is then attachment. Of course it is. What else is it? Think about it. If you're cooking with someone else and you're wanting to feed your children and your hubby as well, then that's also compassion in there. Lucky for you, you know. I mean, I sit in my kitchen here. Who do I cook for? Me. You know, it's kind of a bit depressing. I've probably cooked 10 meals in my life for other people. I normally don't even cook for myself, but these days I am. I'm a housewife. Matt takes me shopping. I can't believe shopping's a brand new experience for me, I tell you. Anyway, motivation. So attachment is the usual motivation for eating. And what happens when you start getting full? What's your motivation for stopping eating? It's aversion. So you can't win, you know. Attachment makes you eat, and then aversion makes you stop eating. So both actions are called negative, because whatever's in the mind is what underpins the thing we do. That's the motivation, and that's what determines the character of whether of the action itself and whether it's negative or positive. That's so fascinating to learn. This is technical. It's necessary, you know. We need to learn this if we will say we're Buddhists. So that's what we're trying to do is in the first stage of the practice, we just try to play safe. Excuse me, I have to sneeze. So on the Bodhisattva path, the logic being, we've got some semblance of control now over our body, speech, and mind. And that's if you really practice. We've got some renunciation, which means we've really looked into what we do with our body and speech. We've really learned to control our attachment, you know. And that's why, that's what I was going to say before. When you take refuge, one of your commitments, there's half a dozen commitments, you know, for refuge. One of your commitments is to first, before you put the food and drink in your mouth, you think first and you offer it to the three jewels. I mean, this is a powerful practice to force us to create virtue, to force us to not do it out of attachment. So when you've done it as an offering, even offering it to someone else, ordinary person, mitigates the action and lessens the attachment, you know. So when you offer to the three jewels, the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, it's such a marvelous little practice to do. In other words, you're conscious before you shove the cake in mindlessly, you consciously think, you know, and of course you can add other things to it, like think that it's empty and all that other things, but the basic commitment is to offer to the three jewels. That's immediately lessens the negativity of the attachment. It weakens the attachment, and you're beginning to make it a virtuous action because your motivation is different. This is the point. But our problem is like I said, in the second point, where there are four things in place when you do an action. First is the object. Second is your mind involved in it. And there's two main things. There's more to it, but this is the simplest one. There's two main things, but we so conflate them because most of the actions we do are automatic, you know, and that's mostly attachment. So we think they're the same thing. But intention literally is volition. I will eat cake. That's neither good nor bad. It's the motivation gives it flavor, gives it character. And so of course it's attachment. Of course it's attachment. So what are we going to do? So we be cautious and offer. Now, the Bodhisattva path, That's where the Lama Zopa and the teachings really actively, proactively talk about having a pure motivation for everything we do. We can do that first, but now we can think everything we do, normal life. When I turn the heater on, why? Because I'm cold. When I turn the AC on, why? Because I'm hot. When I have food, why? I'm hungry. They're all normal, benign actions. And it's shocking to us to almost think that they're called negative, they're called non-virtuous, but that's what they are. I mean, when we really understand Buddha's teachings at a more subtle level, which is what we try to do. So what are we going to do? Let's mitigate it. Let's change our motivation. Let's imagine. I mean, that's why Lama Zopa is so famous for his offerings. You know, I mean, he used to be. Now he doesn't. He just does it in private now. But you could, you know, I remember here, Ajahn telling me 20 years ago when Rinpoche, when his, you know, Ira and Sylvia invited him for dinner, and they sat down at 9 p.m. to Sylvia's wonderful dinner, and they started eating at 2 a.m. because 5 hours was offering prayers. I mean, he's renowned. Nobody can believe Lama Zopa, you know, for 5 hours doing elaborate prayers and offerings and meditations and emptiness before you eat the food. They said they enjoyed it. I can't imagine. I'd go mad. And the thing is, when you're at teachings with Lama Zopa, you know, and it's a Tibetan tradition, in the middle of a teaching, the Tibetan monks come around and offer tea. So you put your cup out and your tea is there. Of course, you want to drink it. You want it to be hot. Forget about it. I'm sorry. 2 hours later, I mean, you would never drink it until the teacher does. So you're going to have cold tea. That's why people bring their thermos flask, you know, so you can keep it hot. He's famous for that. One time on an aeroplane, a short aeroplane journey, Roger was with Rinpoche, and they brought the meal, and Rinpoche, and the meal is there, and Rinpoche is doing his usual meditation, offering the meal to the three jewels, offering it to all the Buddhas and the Dakinis and the Dakas of the universe, whatever he's doing. So he's offering, and then they, like say, come around to take the tray again, and he hasn't touched his food. And Roger said, Rinpoche, do you want to eat your dinner? And he said, no. He said, the main purpose has been achieved. I mean, I'm happy to offer my dinner, but I'm going to eat it. Thank you. So motivation is everything. And it's a miracle, because we can do all the normal actions that we do mindlessly that are driven by attachment, which will put negative seeds in our mind. And really, we've got to analyze this. Don't feel guilty or neurotic. It's just the way the world is, you know. Then we can transform everything. Eating, sleeping, going to the toilet, having sex with the best boyfriend in the universe. You can see it as empty, having no intrinsic nature, and you can do it with a pure motivation. You can decide, but somehow we think, oh, that's just cheating. I don't have a pure motivation. Well, you've got to start somewhere. So that's where it makes us more conscious. It makes us conscious, you know. Before you just shove the food in, before you just jump on the boy, before you go to the movie, do this, do that, because it's attachment that drives all of our decisions. We get bored. We want to do something exciting, you know. So what do you think it is? It's called attachment. But it's because it's benign. It looks nice. It looks okay. And because you're doing it also with somebody else, we think we're going to have fun. It's true. And you don't have to walk around being holy. You don't have to sit there over your dinner with 4 hours with your hands like this. I always remember when I went at Kopan first. And Tibetans have their tradition, their culture with each other is you don't show that you're holy. That's really a no-no. You're trying to act like you're normal, you know, you're very normal, easygoing. So when we Westerners all started going to the Kopan courses and getting all holy, and we'd sit there over our dinner like this, looking very holy, saying our prayers and offering our dinner, looking all holy, sitting upright with our eyes closed. And you notice the Tibetans, they all do their prayer, but they're kind of like, they're going, Sangye Churan, Sangye Churan, like they're looking around at the wall, but they're saying their prayer, but they're not going to look holy. No way, you know, they'll do the opposite. Which is good. You don't have to look holy. You keep it private. But you could be doing this every second of the day. You're talking to somebody, and you know, maybe you don't like them, and you don't have your usual motivation. You make it a compassionate motivation. Everything. And so it totally, literally is completely changing, transforming the character of all those actions you did throughout that day. And because your motivation was pure, because it was conscious, because it was emptiness or bodhicitta, you know, you transform the action. It becomes it drops a seed into your good bank vault instead of your bad bank vault. That's how you transform everyday life. It's not that complicated, but we just have to remember. And the emptiness one is even more powerful, because we believe everything's set in stone, you know. This is this and this is that, and it's good and it's bad and you can't change it. Everything's solid, rock solid. No. And when we understand emptiness, a negative action is a negative action conventionally. It does harm a person, it's driven by a negative karma, and it'll ripen as your future suffering. Fact. But ultimately, it's not set in stone. Ultimately, it has no intrinsic nature. Ultimately, It's not like that. It does function as negative, but from its own side, it's not negative. So you have, when we begin to understand the two truths, then we can completely transform even our negative actions. And that's why the great bodhisattvas can do that. A great bodhisattva who's gone beyond ego, who understands emptiness, and they can actually do a negative action, but it is a powerful positive action because they realize emptiness and they've got bodhicitta. That's where it's a bit scary. If we look at the world and we see a person do a mean thing, we just believe they're mean because we have no vision, no bodhicitta, no emptiness, and we believe everything exists like it appears, which is why it's a really tough one. When you hear the stories about bodhisattvas, doing harmful actions, but based on pure motivation, based on genuine wisdom, which can mean it can only be positive for them and only beneficial to others. We don't like to trust that. That just sounds like, no, that's not possible, because our minds are so concrete. So the first stage is you play safe. You control your body, you control your speech. You try at least not to, you try not to follow too much attachment and aversion. You're very cautious. Then you start to really get to the bodhisattva path. And now because you've got more stability, more clarity, more depth in your practice, you've trained a little bit, you've got some renunciation. Now you got to add bodhicitta to the mix and can really, even negative actions, which normally would be just negative, but so it can actually become a positive action. So extreme examples of this are always marvelous to hear. And these are logical, but we have to study the teachings to understand it, not just believe it. So there's always that story they tell about one of the Buddha in one of his past lives. I forget all the details. Something like he was a captain on a boat and there were 500 merchants. They always tell this story. So the scenario is this. He sees with his clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is a fairly low-level realization. The Buddha says we've had it in countless lifetimes. We've had shamatha many lifetimes, but we haven't used it to realize emptiness, so we lost the plot, So we already, so with shamatha, and Lama Yeshe talks about this beautifully in his Mahamudra book. And one of the qualities we accomplish is crystal clear ability to see subtler phenomena, such as the minds of others, the past, the future. This is totally fitting in the whole Buddhist view of what we're capable of, Of course, it's science fiction in our culture. Your brain can't see anything. That's clear. We're not talking about the brain. We're talking about our subtle level of mind. So you see past and future. And actually for the Buddha, you can't really begin to benefit sentient beings until we've got clairvoyance. And this is a story, there's two stories. There's one story about Lama Yeshe. It's a really good story. This is a nice one. It's a more current one. Forget the Buddha. I'll tell that in a minute. So this particular story, Harry, maybe some of you know Harry and Mary. They're in Crestone. Harry's a meditator. And years ago at Kopan, he was helping one of the Tibetan monks who was very sick. He found a doctor to help the monk. And he happened to tell Lama Yeshe, this obviously is in the early 80s, late 70s. And Lama just dismissed it and said, it's okay, he doesn't need a doctor, he'll be fine. So Lama's Harry's guru, right? So Harry trusted Lama. So Harry observed that the monk kept getting more sick, and eventually he went up to the mountains. He was a Sherpa, and apparently he died. So you could think, well, that sounds like Lama Yeshe was being very negative, didn't care, just let this monk die. He got sick, he didn't get a doctor. So, Harry has faith in Lama, but Lama Lunduk, the abbot, told Harry, well, of course, he said, because of Lama's clairvoyance and because of his bodhicitta and his wisdom, he could see crystal clear. No, his wisdom first. He could see crystal clear the mind of this monk, and he could see exactly the karma this monk had created, how many lifetimes ago, that was now ripening as this particular suffering. And he could see crystal clear that if he'd found a doctor, he would have got better and his life would have been really good. But he wouldn't have finished this particularly heavy karma that he created. And the next life would have been much, much worse suffering. So because of Lama's wisdom, you've got to take this as a given here, that Lama's got that wisdom, the clairvoyance, and then the compassion to do genuinely what is best for this monk. And Lama didn't defend himself and explain why he didn't have a doctor. But because of his compassion, and his wisdom, he could see that if he got sick and died young, he completely cleaned up that karma, and next life, fantastic. Now, if you take that story as true, that level of wisdom, that's extremely wise, but extremely compassionate. And that there couldn't possibly be there couldn't be a millimeter of negativity in Lama's mind for that, or a negative action. That's actually totally positive karma. Now that's shocking for us in our culture because we don't have that level of wisdom. We don't trust that, But that's just tough love to a really extreme level, isn't it? And the one of the Buddha, even a more dramatic example. That he on this boat, he was a captain or something, and he could see with his clairvoyance, and one of these dudes, one of the 500 merchants, was going to kill everybody and take everything for himself, something like that. So that the Buddha, this person, the captain, and he didn't look like didn't walk around with a halo. These bodhisattvas, you see, they go from life to life to life. Once they've got bodhicitta, they go from life to life to life. They're like fanatics. Their total long-term goal is I'm going to become a Buddha as quickly as possible, and they're to help. And their total short-term is to help whoever's in front of them. Their job is to help sentient beings. That's their job. That's their job description. Once they're at that level. So this bodhisattva, he's not walking around with a halo. I promise you. He looks like a regular guy. He's a captain on a boat. If you were there, you'd see a bloke. So he could see crystal clear with his clairvoyance and one of these guys, and he had such compassion for the guy, not to mention the 499 other blokes, but for the guy. Why? Because that fellow, due to his own negative karma of killing everybody and stealing, creates such unbelievable future suffering for himself. The hell realms and all that, you know. So his incredible compassion for the sake of this person. I'd rather go to the hell realms myself. I would rather have the suffering than him. So he wanted to stop him from doing the action, and whatever reason he found the only way to stop him from doing it was to kill him. And his motivation was only for the sake of the other. And talk about Tonglen. It's a total example of Tonglen. He took on the suffering happily, but they all give the teachings in the Mahayana view that not only did he not create an atom of negative karma, by that incredible compassion, he hastened his own Buddhahood. So this is really something very shocking. If we don't learn the teachings, if we don't hear the proper level, and this is why the levels of teachings are so important. This is not taught in the Hinayana teachings. This is not taught in the middle scope and junior school. This is not taught at the first stages of practice. That's where you play safe, you live your vows, there's no wiggle room, you be a nice person, you have good ethics. This is the bodhisattva level. This is outrageous. We don't understand these teachings, it just puzzles us. We've got to understand the teachings. We've got to know the teachings are at different levels. And this is where the motivation one truly is the one that makes the difference. If we can use simple examples like tough love of the mother, we get that. But to the level of killing somebody, hastening your Buddhahood, we've got to really understand clearly the teachings. And that is absolutely logical when we understand the Buddhist view of the mind, understand delusions, how they function, understand virtues, how they function, understand bodhicitta, what it is, and understand emptiness. We've got to learn it. This is the basis for understanding this. It's like you learn science. You just can't just say it's nice. You've got to learn it. Then you'll understand the mechanics of the science. The same here. These are the mechanics of the teachings. This is crucial to understand. You know, the Tibetans have a saying, you don't know who anybody is, so don't judge, you know. This is too much for our minds. Because we one of the worst ways we suffer due to our deep ego grasping and our attachment, we believe in everything we see. You know, and this is what ignorance is. This is what they often have a term in Buddhism, and Lama Yeshe would often use it in Buddhist psychology for the negative states of mind, which are deluded. They're literally superstition. And look now, all the conspiracy theories gone mad in this country. People believe anything. People will believe anything. We believe anything. That's the ignorance. That's the function of ego grasping. It's fundamentalism, you know. That's the function of ego grasping. So it really shows we have bucket loads of this root delusion. It's really shocking. So to hear a teaching like this, which is so much more subtle, more nuanced, more outrageous, more amazing, it's like too much for the mind. We can't cope. So forget tantric teachings, which are even more outrageous. The bodhisattva teachings are pretty incredible. We have to study it to understand it, you know. And the key one here is motivation. This is the point about it. The whole point behind that teaching of the Buddha killing that bloke was motivation. Not just for the sake of the other fellow, but I would rather suffer. That's like the Tonglen one, you know. So motivation is so powerful. We have to become conscious, though. So that means every action we do, being a samsaric person, being in samsara, in this desire body, naturally attachment's job is to drive everything we do to make the body content, to make the body happy. I mean, the body's so huge for us. We make the body the boss, isn't it? As Lama Yeshe puts it, you know. So that's attachment, and we're just completely programmed in this process. We don't have to think it through. That's what we mean by instinct. That's what instinct is. You practice it so often that you're just automatic now. So we've got to unpack that instinct. We've got to change our instinct. Bodhisattvas now have pure instinct. They've reversed the whole process, you know. And that's what we're trying to do. So the simplest things of daily life, which normally would be, you know, eating, sleeping, going to the toilet, hopping into bed with your hubby, being nice, having children, all the normal things. Of course, there's love and compassion there. They're our saving grace. If there's any reasonable relationship, it's because of love and compassion, not because of attachment. We've all got attachment. So if there's not much love and compassion, that's when the nightmares happen. So we know this. And we consciously, actively try to lessen the attachment. That's the first level, just play safe. The next level, we proactively try to put compassion in the place, or emptiness, or renunciation on top of it. So you have your meal, it can be a virtuous action because of your motivation. Having sex with your new boyfriend could be virtuous because of your pure motivation. Now, I'm not trying to be too gross here, but I want to say this, it's important. We only do actions out of attachment because we want to. We think, so if you're in love with your boyfriend, of course you want to sleep with him. But the thought that you don't feel like sleeping with him, nobody thinks that's being selfish. Well, that's a far better time to have sex with him when you don't feel like it. You do it out of compassion. I'm really being serious. You have a meal out of compassion. You're full, but eat for someone else's sake. We never think to do that because we just buy into attachment. Oh, no, I don't feel like it tonight, darling. I've got a headache. He says to you. No, kindly be kind to her. Just because you don't feel like it is the very reason to do it. Then it becomes virtuous. Following attachment makes it non-virtuous. But we think it's just being nice, following what we feel, Oh, I follow my feelings. Got to become conscious. Are we communicating, people, about motivation? So it's not the thing itself. It's the thing that drives it, the motivation. Not even the intention. It's the motivation that drives it. So when we become conscious, we can transform every tiny thing we do in daily life, which normally would be a deluded action, driven by attachment. It's very powerful. It's very liberating. You have to remember, that's all. That's what's hard. So any questions, you people, about that?
Hello, Venerable Robina.
Who's that?
Dawn.
Who is it?
Dawn.
Oh, darling, talk to me.
So when you
pulled down that statue, what was your motivation? Confess.
Well, I want to move forward. And it's it was already an Anglo statue, which there's many versions of history here in this town.
No, pin it down. Was it attachment or aversion, or was it compassion? What was your motivation? That's just not trying to be rude to you. It's just kind of an interesting conversation.
Right. No, I felt that that was the movement that was happening. Like I didn't realize that action would be taking place. I really went for the Indigenous Peoples Day and to protest the obelisk.
I understand.
I had no anger. I felt like I was really trying to keep people safe because it was sort of this group effort with very little tools, and I didn't want anyone to get hurt, So as far as the people that were all coming together there, I don't know, it felt quite peaceful after the police left.
I understand.
So
what's the question, Dawn? Never mind.
So my question is non-discrimination. When we do the exercise where we pull like the people that we are like we envision the people that we have affection for, the people we're indifferent with, and then the people
in equanimity or something, whatever people call it. Equanimity.
Yes.
You try to see enemy, friend, and stranger as kind of equal to each other. That's what you're talking about?
Yeah, so then we're trying to deal with our attachment and aversion around the people that we have affection for, and then the people that we don't have affection for, and the people that we're indifferent for, right? Like we're trying to equalize or not become attached or aversion.
More overtly, that would be a consequence, but more overtly, what that specific practice is about, it's the beginning practice of learning to want to love all beings. And we're trying to shift the logic for why we love people now. Love means may you be happy. And we know perfectly well the only ones we have that for are the ones we're attached to. And the ones we might even say, I hope you're not happy, are the ones we have aversion for. And we simply don't care about the strangers. So what we're trying to do is get beyond that one and shift to become proper logic, to be that we're trying to recognize those three people whom we see through these different lenses, all in terms of how they satisfy my needs or not, which is totally self-centered. We're trying to get ourselves out of the equation and see these three people equal to each other from one point of view. They each are equal in wishing to be happy, and they're each equal in wishing not to suffer. We're trying to see that reality. We're getting ourselves out of the equation. Get your attachment glasses off, your anger glasses off, and your indifference glasses off, and you're going to see three separate people. One might be a maniac, one might be a saint. That's not the issue. This is the most fundamental point. And the Buddha says that everybody wants to be happy. Nobody wants to suffer. We know it theoretically, but this is a powerful practice as a starting point, like a foundation for building genuine love and compassion for everybody, away from the typical view, I want you to be happy because you make me happy, to I want you to be happy because you want to be happy. So we're trying to prove that they're equal to each other. Specifically, that's what it is.
So now when I think about the people that have been hurt by the action of the obelisk,
Okay.
I have a lot of compassion for their pain, because.
So tell me about people tell me how people have suffered as a result of you pulling down that thing.
Well, some people are very angry and want to hurt.
Okay, so why are they angry?
Because they're attached to a certain narrative of history that may not be complete.
Okay, that's fine. So they're angry. So that's why they're suffering. They're angry. They're suffering. So your action triggered their anger. So their anger is why they're suffering. Your action triggered that. Yes. Then question.
I have compassion for them.
And why do you have compassion for them?
Because I've had anger before.
Oh, I see. So you have compassion because the anger is upsetting their minds. That's perfect way to. That's the basis of good compassion, because people cause themselves suffering. Yes.
Right, because I've had those delusions.
Absolutely. Yes.
In my past. Now, what I'm wondering about with I've heard about the inferior, superior, and equality complex.
I don't know what that is. You have to explain it. Is that
okay? Maybe that's from the Zen Buddhism more, but
it's just different people using different terms. So tell me what it means.
So Thich Nhat Hanh, like some of the stuff I listened from him, he talks about the non-discrimination and the delusions of the inferior complex, the superior complex, and the equality complex.
Explain that so I can understand your language.
Well, I guess that's what I was I wanted to know from the Tibetan tradition. Like,
in the end, it's all Buddha's teaching, but I think different people use different terminology. Even among Americans, we have different terms, which is a big problem because we don't know. That's why it's so important to understand what we're talking about. What I'm hearing, so say a little bit more about what he says. Say a little bit more.
What he says is like, so the inferiors to believe that obviously that we're not, we're lower than someone else.
Oh, we're talking about ourselves now.
The delusions. About
ourselves. We're talking about ourselves now.
Right, myself.
Oh, okay, now I get it. Okay,
so attachment to equality complex, then that means.
What, sweetheart?
Like he was saying, if you have an attachment to the equality complex.
What's that one?
I don't know. Like believing that we should all be equal, and yet. That is what we were contemplating with the circle of people.
No, I don't understand if he says attached to how we all should be equal. What
right, the delusion of the equality complex.
What's the delusion about that? I don't understand it.
I don't know. That's what I wanted to ask you.
No, but I don't understand the concept, what he's meaning.
Right.
I can't interpret it. But I can certainly say first two.
I'm not giving you enough. I'm not giving you enough because I didn't understand it from.
I understand. So it's obviously got his way of saying certain things. But the first two, it seems fairly evident. Superiority is called arrogance. I'm important. I'm more important. And we all know the other one, which is I'm not important. And what's interesting about that, Dawn, that's the flip side of arrogance. If we didn't have arrogance, we would not have low self-esteem. This is very sobering to think about. And they all come because we've got ego grasping. So we all have variations of these. Because when you look at a person who's very arrogant, you just prick them. They will collapse into thinking and in other words, both of those are exaggerating certain aspects of yourself. So pride or arrogance or superiority is you over exaggerate your good qualities and you're sort of all puffed up. We get that one, but we often don't think we've got that. But the other one is over exaggerating your bad qualities. And that's the flip side. So in other words, if you don't have superiority one, if you don't have arrogance, you would be content. You'd be humble. And if you don't have low self-esteem, you'd also be humble. So you wouldn't mind if someone else was better than you. But if you've got arrogance, you're really upset when someone's better than you. And if you analyze low self-esteem, we feel so sorry for ourselves, but it's just self-centeredness. We're resentful that people dare be better than us. That's really quite heavy. And they're very linked to each other. It's very fascinating to see that. So the equality one, I can't see what he's saying. I don't know about that one. But these other two are very powerful to look at. The normal, ordinary words are arrogance and low self-esteem. We all identify with low self-esteem. But when you analyze it, pride is all the time thinking about other people, thinking to get other people to think you're important. Low self-esteem is obsessed with how people think you're not important. And we've got both of those. But when we're content, the irony is, when we have self-confidence, we've also got humility. A person who's self-confident is easygoing and very comfortable with who they are, and they're not exaggerating, but they've also got humility. They delight in other people being better than them. So the key thing here is also understanding this crucial difference in Buddhist psychology between the so-called neurotic and the positive states of mind. All the neurotic ones are necessarily I-based, they're distorted, they're embellishing, they're exaggerating, and they're really painful. The positive qualities like self-confidence, humility, compassion, kindness, they're not I-based and they're very comfortable. So this is the crucial thing we have to begin to distinguish, you know.
Yes.
You with me?
Yes, I am.
Good. Thank you, Dawn. I'm sorry I can't answer the first. Somebody else might be able to tell me what to do about that. Thank you, Dawn. Who else, darlings? Huh? What's happening?
Patrick, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask Venerable Robina if she could say again that kind of definition of self-esteem that you just mentioned.
Low self-esteem. I mean, low self-esteem.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Very interesting in that when you learn the Buddhist model of the mind, you learn all these different terminologies. They don't have such a thing. We've made that one up. But it's interesting. There's more to it than this. I'll just say a little bit more. Okay, so first of all, we have the delusion called, all the delusions exaggerate something. Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake. Anger exaggerates the ugliness of the ex-boyfriend. Pride or superiority, whatever you want to call it, exaggerates your good qualities. You might have the good qualities, but delusions always exaggerate. They over-exaggerate. And they're always I-based, and they're not happy. So when that collapses, when a proud person is insulted or meets a person who is better than them, look at what happens. It deflates and becomes self-loathing, low self-esteem. Oh, I'm not good enough. And I mean, a proud person is very threatened by other people and very insulted and very offended very easily. So that turns into low self-esteem. But some of us more live at the pride level, some of us more live at the low self-esteem level, which means we're over obsessed with how we're not good enough. We're always thinking about it, always thinking other people should think we're better than we are, always offended if people don't praise us. And if you really look at it carefully, we're very resentful that other people are better than we are. We're not happy about that. We're prepared to have compassion for ourselves if we have low self-esteem, but we're not prepared to have compassion for ourselves if we're arrogant. But they're both just different aspects of the same thing. One is deflated, over obsessed with how bad I am, and one is inflated and over obsessed with how good I am. They're both I-based. They're both I-obsessed. Can you see my point? So they're both, so indeed one might harm others more and one harms mostly oneself, but they're both coming from the same place of stating this poor me, you know? And it's very powerful. And when you really realize if we didn't have arrogance, we would not possibly have low self-esteem. We would have humility and we'd be delighted with somebody else being better than us. We'd be happy to meet someone else who's even better. We'd rejoice in their qualities and we'd learn from it. Because when you're humble, you are self-confident. It's very powerful, I think. Can you see what I'm saying? The crucial piece here is in Buddhist psychology, all the neurotic states of mind are exaggerate, they distort, and they're very I-obsessed. They're I-obsessed. The virtues are not I-obsessed, and they're valid, and they're reasonable, and they're spacious, and they're connected, and they're open, and they're beneficial and useful. We've got to see this difference. It's crucial. Do you understand?
Yeah, it's almost, if I might, is it kind of an analogy to the Christian idea of like you can't have the devil without the angel? Kind of like if you know you can't have one, you can't have arrogance without low self-esteem and vice versa.
No, that's
So
interesting, isn't it? I know, it's very interesting. It's very
okay,
interesting.
no, just curious. Yeah, thank you.
Good, Patrick. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Who else? That's why I think the Dalai Lama is an amazing example. I mean, anybody who's met him or been around him a bit, you know, he's super powerful. He's super charismatic. He's really bossy. I mean, he's all the things that you'd think an arrogant person would be, but it's so clear he's not arrogant. He's just full of love, but he's powerful. So when we think of a humble person, we think of a little mousy person. When we think of a proud person, we think of a very loud person. It's really cliched. His Holiness is, I mean, I'll never forget. And never mind that. I'll tell you, an experience. Back in the 80s, Lama Yeshe appointed 10 of us Westerners to be security guards for His Holiness in a visit to Europe in 1982. And Lama being so amazing, he got 5 of us women and 5 men, which is unheard of, to have 5 female security guards. We traveled around with His Holiness on the aeroplane. We went to these different centers. And it was amazing for me just to be up close for this 6 weeks and observe the way His Holiness behaved. I mean, there'd be a press conference. He would run the whole thing. He just took over. He was the bossiest person around, but everybody adored him. He was charismatic. He was so powerful. He was loud. He was funny, but he was completely humble, completely unassuming in his own self and loving everybody. So for me, that gives us great courage to realize to be humble doesn't mean to be a mouse. We conflate humility with low self-esteem, and then we conflate self-confidence with arrogance. And that's where, if we see the positive qualities are not neurotic and are not I-based, they're reasonable qualities. When we can understand this, it's very freeing. So many people, if they're very good at things, they agonize, oh, how can I be so good at it? How can I not be also proud? Well, you have to catch your mind. You're good at it and be happy with you're good at it, but you have to be proud. But we can't see the difference. It's very powerful. Mute yourself, please, somebody. It's very necessary to see this difference between the positive and the negative qualities. This is distinct to Buddhist psychology, I tell you. It's quite unique. So we have to catch the voices in our head, you know. When they're virtuous, they're spacious, relaxed, connected to others. When they're deluded, they're completely obsessed with I. And that's why low self-esteem and pride coming from the same place. It's very fascinating. And humility and self-confidence coming from the same place. It's very fascinating. I always remember one time years ago, before I was a Buddhist, I saw a television interview with two famous people. One was Dame Margot Fonteyn, that amazing English ballet dancer. I don't know if people knew her, but I know when I was a kid at that time and I was into ballet. So, and I love that woman. I watch her dancing. She's the one who danced with Nureyev when she was older, you know. And so something about her. And then the other person, I'll tell you, was an Australian cricketer. He's like your Babe Ruth. His name is Don Bradman, in the 30s. And they were both top in their field. I mean, they were the top of the top and revered. And they were completely unassuming and funny and humble and that's why everybody adored them. You know, with sportsmen, if they're really arrogant, they're the best basketballer, but nobody can stand being around them because they're so arrogant. So to be good at something, you don't have to be arrogant. That's what I'm trying to say. And to be humble, you don't have to be mousy, you know. And so the difference is huge. They were both so unassuming. They know perfectly well they're the top in their field, but they didn't have arrogance and they respected other people. They thanked other people and they weren't creepy crawly kind of humble. They were just easygoing and relaxed, but very self-confident. It's really crucial to find the difference in our minds, you know, the deluded ones and the virtuous ones. And this is, again, what I'm saying, a distinct characteristic in the way Buddhist psychology describes the different states of mind. When we start to see this in ourselves, it's very liberating. You understand, Patrick?
Venerable Robina, I think Tony had a question next.
Good, Tony. Talk to me.
Can you hear me? I think you
I
can.
can, Tony. I certainly can.
Excellent. So going back to the beginning and having items and making marvelous offerings to everyone and everything, I think it's really wonderful. However, I found that there was something there was something that I found that was missing.
What's
and the missing part is the thanking first, the thanking of that which you are given. As an example, I have a cantaloupe. I open it up, I gut it, and then I offer it. But what about the thanking the cantaloupe itself for giving itself? It has for its own death, so that I am therefore allowed to make that offering.
I understand. So that's, I hear what you're saying, Tony. It sounds a very marvelous quality because it's called gratitude. I agree with you. But I mean, of course, the Buddhists would argue and say that a cantaloupe is not a sentient being, so there's no point in thanking the cantaloupe.
Well, then I would argue with
I
the
know.
Buddhists about that, because I guess
You're allowed to do that.
see
But, you know,
things differently.
meanwhile, when Buddhists, you know, if you've got proof, and that's fantastic, then Buddha will be happy to hear it, which means Buddhists can be. If you just like the idea that a cantaloupe has got a mind, that's okay, but keep your mind open until you've proved it otherwise. I mean, that's all I'm
Just
doing.
like about
It
life,
hasn't got a mind. I'm keeping
not,
it open.
not
until I
necessarily
prove it.
mine.
Pardon?
I,
What? You've just muted yourself. Unmute again, Tony.
there we go. Sorry about that.
Go on. What you're saying?
I mean, of course, I don't know whether or not a cantaloupe has a mind.
No, I know.
I certainly know that it had a life.
No, sure. So anyway, the point you're making is great. So there's a whole aspect of that. Of course, there is. There's a huge one, especially. I mean, one approach, you know, certainly the Buddhists would say is when in one of the many meditations we do when we're trying to cultivate, when we're trying to grow compassion and then bodhicitta, is to think of the kindness of others. And so one really powerful meditation, Tony, is that when you analyze, since you were conceived even up to now, every tiny thing that has facilitated your life, all of us, your life, is the handiwork of countless sentient beings. It's a very powerful meditation. Or, I mean, even if we don't eat meat, forget that. All the food we've got, all the people, all the countless people, even just my glasses. Think of all the people who've worked on my glasses, so I can see the people who've worked on my clothing, the animals who've given their wool, everything you turn to, all the food we eat, all the jobs we have, all the glasses, everything since we're born is the handiwork of countless sentient beings. And this is one of the powerful techniques to develop incredible love and compassion for sentient beings. So it's all there. And that's an amazing contemplation to do, because it's true. This is scientific truth. You know, it's powerful. It opens us up, because I mean, normally we see everything through the lenses of our attachment. And if you give me a beautiful cake, now if you give me that beautiful cantaloupe, I'm very happy if it makes me happy. But if it's not so tasty, I'm not going to be so grateful. So it really shows we do have gratitude, but often just based on our attachment. Whereas if we think that whatever we get, even if it's a stale piece of cake, somebody made it, somebody worked on it. It's very powerful to really smash past self-cherishing. It's an amazing attitude to develop. And it's a very powerful meditation, isn't it? That's the way
and get beyond the conditioned aspects, like not enjoying the cake, it not being quite proper enough.
I missed all that part, Tony. I'd like to understand you. What did you say?
You gave the example of a cake and or a cantaloupe, and offering the cantaloupe to someone, and another taking the cantaloupe and finding it not quite up to par, not quite up to standard.
That's right. Exactly.
Not as good as it should be.
That's right.
Then that's a conditioned receiving of a gift. It's already preconditioned.
It's called attachment.
All kinds of attachments.
It's called attachment not getting what it wants.
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is, even if attachment doesn't get what it wants, somebody still made it, so we can think of how kind they are. That's the particular meditation we're talking here, the one you're mentioning, which is marvelous, is gratitude for all the sentient beings, but for whom we wouldn't even have a body, you know.
No kidding.
It's a marvelous one. Thank you, Tony. Very kind.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good. Who else, Mary? Anybody else got a question?
Venerable Robina, I'm the other Mary. Mary Mogenberg's having internet issues, so I'm going to take over hosting.
Okay.
But I have a question. His Holiness the Dalai Lama website, when he offers the transmissions of mantras, what does that mean? For me,
It's very easy. When I first learned to make a cake from my mother, I remember the day, the cake, the whole experience, because she transmitted to me, and she is there's a lovely term in Tibetan, rigsin, knowledge holder. My mother was a knowledge holder. She had the knowledge of how to make a cake. I wanted that. And so she transmitted to my mind that recipe, didn't she? Same here, just the same, no different. Do you understand that? It's logical. Passing it on from one human being to the next. He's just transmitting the sound of the mantra, and my mother transmitted to me the recipe. It's exactly the same meaning. There's not a fraction of difference. It became real. It was the first time it became real for me. I received the power of my mother's knowledge because I was open and listening to it. It's exactly that meaning. Can you hear that? Does it make sense?
makes perfect sense. Thank you.
We sort of mystify it because it's called transmission when it's prayers and things, you know. But as Lama Yeshi said, the Buddha's dead, you know. So the Four Noble Truths only become real for you when you hear it from someone's mouth. That's why we need it. That's what I mean of a teacher. My mother taught me how to make a cake, and I'll never forget it. She transmitted her knowledge. I could have read a book. You can read the mantra, but you hear it directly from a person who's got it inside them. It's much more powerful. Do you understand? Thank you. What else, people?
Venerable Robina?
Yes, Barbara.
Yeah.
Talk to me.
I think it's along the same lines. I don't understand what empowerment are.
Same thing, the same meaning.
Same thing. It's just a different,
more advanced level.
it's just a different word.
It's no, not quite. It's a particular type of ceremony in the Vajrayana tradition when you receive an empowerment into a particular practice. Let's say the practice of the Buddha Tara. It's specific to the more advanced level of teachings, Tantra or Vajrayana. And you go to the ceremony, and it's just like the transmission. It's just longer. It's a more elaborate ceremony, but it's the same principle. So empowerment is a good one. My mother basically gave me the recipe, so she empowered me to make a cake, didn't she? So it's like that. It's the same meaning, except it's a more elaborate ceremony, but it's the same idea behind it. You understand, Barbara? Does that make sense? Or not?
I do. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. What else, people? Anything? Something? 10 past. No more questions.
Patrick has a question. Go ahead, Patrick.
Who has?
Me, Patrick.
Good on you, Patrick. Talk to me. Good, darling. Talk to me.
Just to back up just a little bit, or maybe a lot, when you said somebody with humility, or actually somebody who has the quality of being humble, generally has confidence about that, because in my whole low self-esteem life, I've never occurred to me that someone who's humble would have a lot of confidence.
That's the whole point, because we think humility is like a little mouse.
A mouse, right.
Like we think it's like low self-esteem. That's not humility. Humility is a valid state of mind. It's a virtuous state of mind, Patrick, because it's not ego-based. But low self-esteem is I-based. That's the character. These are the two distinguishing character. That's the key distinguishing characteristic in Buddhist psychology between so-called negative and positive states of mind. It's not just some kind of moralistic idea. There's an actual character. When it's genuine love, which is a delight in someone else's happiness, that's love, Patrick. But we mix it with attachment because we only love those who we think are gorgeous. So we think they're practically the same, but they're separate states of mind. Attachment is I-based and needy, and then love is a genuine, open-hearted delight in someone else's happiness. So the virtuous states of mind are always other-based. They're always spacious, and they're more valid and reasonable. So humility is a genuine contentment in who you are, and you're not trying to show off all the time. I mean, a person who's got humility would be a person who's content in themselves. They might even say they don't have many qualities, but they're not low self-esteem, not self-loathing, not all the time thinking I'm bad, I'm ugly. That's what low self-esteem, we're self-obsessed. But humility is not, it's just relaxed and easygoing. People who are humble don't get upset easily, don't get angry easily. Do you understand? They're easygoing. They're not threatened by people because it's a positive quality. Their mind is content. They're easygoing. They're relaxed. Can you hear that? It's powerful. Unmute, sweetheart.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, it just went out of my head. Never mind. Just went straight out of my head.
Okay, but this is the difference, Patrick. When we study Buddhist psychology, we sort of hear the words negative, positive. We just think it's moralistic. They're technical terms for very specific characteristics in the different states of mind. And that's why we have to learn them first and then learn to identify them in ourselves. And the negative ones causes pain and are inflated and distorted and hurt others. And the positive ones are relaxed and easygoing and make us happy and help us to help others. That's why we have to see the difference. This is the job of being a Buddhist, to distinguish between them. You with me? So powerful, this. Go on then, people. Thank you, Patrick. Really good point.
Hi, Venerable Robina.
Yes, hello, Faye.
I have a question. So you're saying, if let's just say we had a bad intention of making friends, and we want to be liked, or we want.
Start again, Faye. What are you saying exactly? Say it again. I
Oh,
didn't hear.
you gave the story about if, say, we didn't have a good intention of
No,
making.
I'm using purposely here the two different words differently. Intention, the way I'm using it here, is the equivalent of the word mental action or karma. It's the bare bones thought, I will. There, and that's neither good nor bad. Then we have the thing that we call motivation, and that's either negative motivation or positive motivation. So I think you're referring to the motivation here, yeah?
Yeah, sorry. If we
Yeah.
don't have a good motivation for, say, befriending someone, but we want something from them.
If maybe they're famous or they're rich and you want to suck up
Right.
to them. That's right, exactly. That's attachment.
Yeah, so let's just say, what if in the middle we realize that we didn't have a good motivation, and then
Yeah.
we try to have a pure motivation? Does
You
that
change-
does that negate our karma, or does it create a new, like, do we have
I
then?
think- Okay, the fundamental idea about karma is every millisecond of every thought you have drops a seed into your mind. That's it. So then, for 5 hours you've been lying. So for 5 hours you've been dropping lying seeds in your mind. And then suddenly you decide to tell the truth, and now you're dropping positive seeds in your mind. So you're developing a new habit. That's good. So every time you play the right note on the piano, you're weakening the habit to play the wrong note, aren't you? But you can also do more dramatic purification by regretting your lying and putting atomic bombs under it with purification and vowing never to lie again. That strengthens it. So yes, every time you tell the truth, that counteracts the lying. That's bare bones, but you can do much more powerful counteracting, and that's what the purification practices are. Do you understand?
Yeah.
They're
Thank you.
clear. Good, darling. Good.
And then you were talking about the monk who, if he didn't eat the medicine, his karma of being sick would have been pushed back. So
Not
is
so much,
each time-
the way they said it, he had this particular karma, from a negative karma from the past, that was now ripening as his present suffering. So if he'd gotten a doctor and got better, he would have had a very fine life, but he wouldn't have finished that negative karma. And so next life would have been much worse suffering. So by having the suffering now, he completed the karma, he finished it completely and was all finished, and next life was fantastic.
Okay, so, but I'm just wondering then, like, if we're eating medicine when we're sick, does that mean we're kind of
I mean,
pushing
if
that?
you're really bright, no, this is a good point, honey. Yes, it's a very good point. I mean, it's not, if we really understood our own mind, and we really had clairvoyance, and we really had compassion, and we really wanted to practice hard, we would be happy to put up with the suffering and know that we're purifying our negative karma. So of course, if it gets that bad and you can't take it, take your pill, but at least do it with bodhicitta. So yeah, be conscious like this. Absolutely, absolutely. Every second we have a moment of suffering, that is the end of that particular seed. So the bodhisattvas know this, and they are so happy. They're even glad when bad things happen because they want to clean up their karma. But I mean, we're not brave enough to do that. But you're exactly right, Faye. You're exactly
So how do we take medicine with bodhicitta? How does that
You
work?
decide you're going to do it so you can be healthy, so you can help others. That's what bodhicitta is. So simple. Eat your food with that motivation. Go to the movies with that motivation. So may I go to the movie, enjoy it, and make others happy. So I can be a happy person and relax. That's why we've got to relax, I mean, if we can meditate 24 hours a day like the great yogis, we won't need to relax. But if we do relax, do it with a happy mind and not out of attachment and misery. Do it, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to relax so I can be relaxed and then I can do a better job when I'm going to work again. So it's just skillful means to think differently about everything we do. It's very skillful, very easy. We have to remember, it almost seems too easy. Do you understand, Faye?
Thank you.
Doing it, you see, this is the trouble. We hear Lamas Opa say, do it with bodhicitta. And we go, oh God, what's bodhicitta? I don't have bodhicitta. So we get a bit lost. It just means attempt to have a positive thought. I'm doing it so I can be useful to others. I'm going to a movie, why? So I can be useful, so I can be my friend and enjoy their company and be kind. So I can, everything we can do like that. Everything, we've just got to be conscious so we can transform every tiny action. So skillful. And it's also proving emptiness because nothing has an intrinsic nature. Do you understand, Faye? Good, darling. Who else? Anybody else? Any questions, please?
Yes, I have a question, Venerable Robina. It's Victor.
Good, Victor. Happy to hear you. I'm
sorry my camera's not working, but I've been struggling with this idea. People call me being a martyr. I just thought I'm being compassionate. So how would you differentiate a martyr from being compassionate?
That's a really good point, Victor. So that's a good point, isn't it? I know that's a very tricky one too, because, well, first of all, if people tell you, tell them to mind their own business and look at their own minds, tell them to go away, how rude they are telling you that. How rude they are, Victor, to pay no attention to them. So you've got to know your own mind. So again, the point about martyr, it's a nice word we use, isn't it? That's kind of like, martyr is I'd say in the negative quality. It's kind of like, I was thinking, different people, the sort of, there's mummy's helpers, and then there are the naughty girls, the good girls and the bad girls, or the boys in your case. So the naughty boys would always make trouble and mess up the house and never help mummy, but the good boy would always run around being nice to mummy and helping everybody and trying to make everything peaceful. So that looks like they're really nice, but their attachment is to their own sense of who they are as, I'm helping mummy, I'm a good person. And then when it's driven by attachment, Victor, that's when it becomes like a martyr. When it's driven by attachment, you see yourself as a good person, and we've got this sense of ourself. I'm a good person. Look at me. I'm helping other people. It's very self-conscious. But if it's compassion, it will be genuine empathy with someone else's suffering and the wish to help them. So, of course, when we don't have both purely, because we're ordinary people, we're going to have a bit of both, but we've got to see the difference. It's like distinguishing between humility and low self-esteem. Humility is a comfortable, easygoing quality. Compassion is a comfortable, easygoing quality, and it's delighting in other people. And then, but martyr is self-centered and self-conscious, and a bit, it's kind of, it's self-conscious, a good word we use. Are you seeing the difference, what I'm saying, Victor?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Tell them to mind their own business, You have to know your own mind, Victor.
Okay, good advice.
I can see that in my family. I remember one of my sisters and I, we joke about it. We had a pretty volatile family. There were 9 people, 7 kids, and we're all bossy like me, Except my brother, he's the seventh of the 7 children. He's the least bossy. He had 7 bossy older sisters. You can't imagine the poor thing. Anyway, never mind. But one of my sisters, she's also bossy, but she was always a pacifier. She spent all her energy trying to control everybody to make them all, because she couldn't stand troubles. Now, I didn't mind trouble. I didn't mind if there was fights and arguments. I'd probably hop in the middle, but she had to do everything in her power to stop so she'd make sure Daddy didn't go there. So maybe she doesn't see Rabina put Rabina here. And if Daddy comes home late and he might be drunk, get mummy out of the way so she doesn't do this. She was always controlling everything because she personally couldn't stand problems, but she looked like she was being kind. But that's kind of like being attached. Do you see what I'm trying to say? A little bit, Victor.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you.
Minds, we've got a bit of both mixed together. So maybe we've got some humility and some low self-esteem. Maybe we've got some self-confidence and some arrogance, because we can't have it purely one way or the other. If you had only attachment and low self-esteem, you'd kill yourself. If you had only arrogance, you'd kill other people. So we've got to, our virtues are polluted by our delusions. So we've got to notice the difference and then learn to be brave and only try to come from the, So in other words, stopping following attachment when it comes to other people. So this is a good example. Compassion for somebody. This is when it would be deluded. So I always use the example, let's say you've got an alcoholic brother and you love your brother. Love is a virtue. May he be happy. You have compassion for your brother. Compassion sees other people suffering and has empathy and wishes they didn't have it. That's compassion. So you have that. But let's say you also got attachment, and we've all got attachment until we get rid of it. So attachment in us, you see, is this junkie inside us that can't stand problems. So from the attachment point of view in our own mind, this brother is making us crazy. His alcoholism is upsetting our apple cart. He's upsetting our life. How dare he do that? Attachment gets very upset. So then we don't realize, but we butt our nose in to try and help our brother, tell him about AA, thinking we're just being compassionate, but we're not minding our own business, and we're sticking our nose in where it doesn't belong. He hasn't asked for our advice. We bully him into going to AA, thinking we're being compassionate. No, we're just following our own attachment. We're pushing himself. So then he gives it up, and then we get angry with him, and we talk about him behind his back. That's not because of compassion. That's because of attachment and aversion. So we've always mixed together. You know, we've got to be so clear in our minds. You understand? Do you understand, Victor?
Yes,
Good.
yes, very much so.
This is being our own therapist. This is the job of being a Buddhist, I tell you. That's the real job of being a Buddhist. Until we start doing this, we're not being a Buddhist. Honestly, this is the point. This is Buddha's expertise. The distinguishing between delusions and virtues. That's the job. All the way from here to enlightenment. This is so powerful.
Venerable Robina, so just to clarify, when compassion and attachment are mixed up, it's when we think they should do something that we think they should do.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
That's right. That's exactly. We don't see the difference. And this is also another, this is right, Faye, exactly right. I mean, we might be right about it. We might be right. You see your brother exactly, but he's not ready for your advice. He doesn't want it. He's not ready to give alcohol up. So mind our own business. Have compassion. Love him for who he is, but stick your nose out. And then if you're really watching, then one day you might see there's an opportunity to help him and he'll want your help. Then it'll be ready. But we just barge in thinking we're being so noble. We make a mess half the time, you know. Because it's of our own anxiety, it's our own attachment, it's our own aversion, but we don't realize. We call it being compassionate. It's very wrong, you know. And so we make a mess in our relationships like this so much. Well, the other aspect of this is very powerful, and this sounds quite shocking. People, you know, we're very compassionate. But then we think why we suffer because we're compassionate. We get exhausted. We get compassion fatigue, people talk about. You cannot possibly suffer for compassion. Compassion is a virtue. You cannot suffer because of a virtue. It's because of delusions that we suffer. So the delusion is because attachment in us, and this is normal human beings. This is why we suffer. We should have compassion for ourselves. But we don't suffer because of a compassion when we see those sick people or the dying people. Because attachment just can't stand problems. Attachment freaks out, and when it sees a problem, aversion arises, or anger arises, or depression arises. That's why we suffer when we see compassion, when we have compassion. We don't suffer because of compassion. This is a crucial point to understand. And again, it comes down to the same thing every time. We have to distinguish between the characteristics of a deluded, negative, non-virtuous state of mind and a positive, valid, beneficial state of mind. This is unique to Buddhist psychology. And if we don't study this and learn it first, we will never hear it properly. And therefore we'll never distinguish the difference in our own minds, you know. This is what practice is. Truly, this is the essence of being a Buddhist. Distinguishing between delusions and virtues. That's it. What else? Time to go home. Look, 8:30, 8:26. At least on our coast, anyway, in the middle of the mountains here. Okay, you people, time to go home. So I hope that suits Mary Morgenberg. Everybody else, hope there's something useful. It was helpful for me. Thank you very much. Because every time I have to say it, I get clearer. So I'm very grateful to you. Thank you. So thank you very much, everybody. Good night and love to you, and see you again somewhere, somehow. We all keep moving and all never give up on ourselves. We've all got amazing potential. We must never forget that. Have confidence in that. And then we sustain, then we'll persevere, I promise. And it's logical, because delusions are not at the core of our being. That's the point, okay? Remember that. And we delight in this 90 minutes together. Because every thought, we've sown a seed, and those seeds will not go astray. So we nourish them with our virtue and our practice from this second forward, and delight for each other and ourselves. And make compassion grow and grow. Jangchub, Semchub, Rinpoche, Makye Panam Kegu Chig, Kyepa Nyampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gongdu Pavasho. That's it. Good night.
Thank you.